Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows, Season 4, Episode 4, The Night Market. In this episode, folks are out here checking out this wild destination for wildly different reasons. We've got cage fighting without a cage, and we've got union negotiations. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. Max, if you're out there, thank you, sir, for this. This episode is pretty funny. I was like more into this than I expected to be, considering we're just going to get into it. So we start things off with Nadja being extremely psyched that her business is going super well. They have a ton of customers. We see people literally clamoring at the door trying to get in. And I really want to mention her outfit here because she is talking to the camera in this scene. She's got a single stripe of burgundy in her hair. And she's wearing these like reading glasses that have rhinestones all the way around the underside, plus these dangling rhinestone bits that fall to like her cheeks. A really fascinating look. I say that she had a burgundy streak, but I think, no, it's both of her pigtails have burgundy in them. This is a new look for her. And we are finding out that despite the fact everything is going so well with the customers, we have a real issue when it comes to the wraiths and their performance of their duty. So we've had 6 deaths in the past week. 4 of them were human, which is apparently considered not so bad. This is the only thing, and I am not mad about it, but I wish we got a little bit. I really want to know what people tell others about where they're going, because nothing seems to ever catch up with our friends. And like a lot of people have disappeared or are being buried on their property. And this is granted not their property. This is the Vampiric Council headquarters, like that building. So it's a different situation. But, you know, my feeling is always, I keep like putting this in sort of the context of the Sookie Stackhouse novels, which I'm covering with Miles for patrons. And the whole thing with vampires in that universe is that everybody knows vampires exist because they have come out publicly and told everyone. And that the reason that they felt safe in doing this was because finally a synthetic blood substitute was successfully invented that they can now live on, and they don't have to feed off of humans because it provides the same nutrients. Of course, it's not nearly as good, so that's not really what anybody is solely surviving on, but it's really good for PR. And the whole like way that the world works is that a lot of vampires are like trying to mainstream, as they call it. And they get more worried about what happens to humans on their property because it draws attention. If a vampire dies, it's like going to be political ramifications within the vampiric community, but the authorities usually do not care. When it's a human, it turns into a really big problem, especially depending on the nature of their death, especially. Like if they're killed by another vampire, especially through feeding, that's like a PR nightmare and they hate that. So with this, does anybody ever, like, what I keep thinking about is you take an Uber to the vampiric headquarters And the last transaction on your bank account after you vanish is an Uber transaction. And they find the driver who's like, yeah, I dropped them off right here in front of this weird office building. And it seems like a real quick, like, piece of work for them to start to hang around and see lines and lines of strange weirdos hanging out outside the building after dark as they begin to put things together. I would sort of enjoy seeing a little bit of that, if I'm honest, but also it doesn't actually matter. So I'm sort of 50-50 on that. Martin says they probably just use their hypnosis to get people to leave them alone. That would work on individuals. But when everybody's got access to like a case file that says the same thing, do they just hypnotize like every person who comes, and nobody ever is like, how come nobody's pursued this lead? You know what I'm saying? I feel like, in other words, we could have a really great spin-off show that is folks at the local police precinct who are trying to like figure out what the fuck is going on, and they keep almost getting closer, and then whatever happens, and we get to see like the weirdness of it. And granted, I'm not a big fan of propaganda anymore, so this could have its problems, but you can make them real goofy losers and it would still be okay. Martin says, this is one of my favorite episodes. It's funny, sure, but I mostly just appreciate the world building and creativity on display. Yeah, definitely. Definitely agree with that. So it turns out that the wraiths are basically protesting their workplace treatment. They've been given jobs, but they have to sleep in the supply closet. And Evil Mabel is trying to convince Nadja to listen to their concerns. All Nadja keeps doing is like, she essentially is doing that. They're lucky to have jobs. They're lucky to have a supply closet to sleep in. Like, she's doing the terrible boss thing. So when I said at the beginning of this episode that I enjoyed this more than I expected to, I kind of thought what we might have would be like that we were leading into something that was going to go on for the whole season. And that is Nadja butting heads with the wraiths. Now, I am by no means saying that this is over. Don't twist it. But I am saying that I thought I was going to have to sit there and watch her just like beat on these poor wraiths and like make their lives miserable, and that they wouldn't really get to come back at her with anything, especially the way that the episode ends. At first it looks like they're just going to get screwed over because somebody got a hit and they're happy with that. But then the wraiths put their feet down, and more than that down, and it takes a left turn unexpectedly that made me really, really happy. So Martin says that's kind of what Wellington Paranormal is, except it's with the original What We Do in the Shadows movie cast. Is that a movie also, Martin? I've never even heard of it. Wellington Paranormal. That's a really great name, honestly. They just had a TV show. I've never heard of this before. Checking it out. Definitely going to look at that. So, oh my God, you guys, I'm so sorry. I opened my Kindle instead of clicking over to Hulu. Here it is. So Nadja finally starts to figure out, like, I need to handle this situation because they're becoming organized. And she says, oh, I know exactly how to handle that. And Evil Mabel, who is definitely on the side of the wraiths in this situation, like, she has to play the role of being Nadja's right hand, but she also clearly doesn't agree with a lot of what Nadja's doing and her outlook on management. So she's trying to rep for them in as delicate a way as she can and make suggestions, but not screw herself to the point that Nadja no longer wants to talk to her about anything anymore. So we come back into the club after the credits, And it's transformed a little bit. And I thought that this was interesting. I'm curious if this is always what it's going to look like now, or if it's done for this, like, for weeknights or something. But previously, we had all of these tables that were, you know, they were lit up from the inside, and they were that height where you just stand at them. You don't sit. And they were scattered around what seemed to be like a sort of open dance floor. In this, we start off with all of these tables that are covered in tablecloths. They are not lit up. They have candles on top. And they are shorter and have chairs around them so people can sit. Because it's a sort of like dinner theater feel. But I don't think there's dinner because there's just blood, which I guess is dinner. So I guess it is. But you know what I'm saying? It's a sort of like a jazz club feel from the type of jazz clubs I'm used to only seeing in movies, and that I'm sure technically do exist, but I have literally never heard of one anywhere that I have ever lived. Probably because I don't travel in the circles that would go to jazz clubs. I, for the record, am not averse to checking out a jazz club. It seems like the kind of thing that might be sort of interesting to do. But it's definitely got a throwback feel. There's not a lot of like the kind of club that this is feels like it's in the 40s. You know what I'm saying? So this is a very, very different vibe from the way the club ordinarily, or the way it started off looking. And we see Colin Robinson, who is practicing tap dancing and singing, and he is forgetting the words and being driven really, really hard because now he is their business. It's no longer about like a fun hobby for him that Laszlo is actively discouraging. It is about making the most out of this interest so that they can exploit it and make as much money off of it as they can. And I am really, what I think is sort of fascinating here is like, my assumption had been, oh, okay, so we're going to have Colin Robinson be boring in an extremely new way. But the vampires seem to be hyped about what he's doing. So he's not draining them when he is dancing. It seems like they are getting something out of it. They are actually enjoying themselves. And I don't think he's feeding at all. We never see his eyes light up. And I'm not sure if that's just a thing of the past or if that would be indicative of what's going on with him. But I'm wondering if there's like a whole different thing going on with the way he gets nutrition anymore. Like, does he need to eat? Does he need to, like, what's up with him now? What's the deal? So he says something to Laszlo about how he forgot the lyrics and I want to take a break and read my book. Laszlo is like, come here and give me that book. And he tries to act like he doesn't have it, but he does. And he comes over and hands it over, and it is fairy tales. It just is called fairy tales. And Laszlo is explaining to him about how the Little Red Riding Hood is about a gruesome, unsolved child abduction, which, isn't exactly correct, but also isn't exactly incorrect either. And it turns out that Colin hasn't actually read this. So he's saying things like, no, that's not true. I don't believe you. There's also Rumpelstiltskin, which he says his name is actually Rumpled Dickskin. That's where he got his name. He doesn't tell you that, does he? And there's like a lot about what Laszlo is saying to him regarding the realities of the supernatural world versus what is in this book that are clearly like truths that Laszlo knows and is like, that is not what that's about actually. And then there's a part later where he's just clearly pulling stuff out of his ass and saying it and eventually says to Colin. And sometimes grown-ups just make stuff up and they just say it and it's not even true. So anyway, this is when Xerxes shows up to talk to Nadja. And he doesn't talk so much as hand over cards that have very bold lettering on them. He hands a card over to Evil Mabel. Thank you for taking the time to work through these issues. We have a list of demands to be addressed. Number 1, we require more than 1 break a day so that we may haunt the descendants of our transgressors. Nadja says we would all like to have more time for our hobbies. Number 2, we will not be blamed for all phantom smells at work. This is an old building with old pipes, and the smells emanating therefrom are out of our control. That's as far as it gets, and it's remarkable because they are barely even demands. Like, they just want more than 1 break and for them to not be blamed on, like, for smell. That's it. And Nadja is so angry, and I am just like, girl, what is the matter with you? She's so pissy. I was giving her a lot of credit about how she could potentially handle this business, and I'm seeing this, and I'm just like, absolutely not, ma'am. What winds up happening was a long time coming. So she gets up in his face, so to speak. I have given you and your weird, faceless friends a job and a lovely, warm supply closet to sleep in. Without me, you would have nothing. Goodbye. I don't have time for this. And I'm just, of course, thinking, this isn't going to go super well for you, you know? Like, everything that it's just the same exact thing as workers in the world. If you piss everybody off and they all bail, what exactly are you planning to do? What do you think is going to happen? This is a popular, like, lately especially, you guys know, if you're in the world, there's just this constant refrain of nobody wants to work anymore. And on the one hand, a part of me is like, they probably don't. Because frankly, it's simply not worth it. Like, it hasn't been worth it for some time, actually. Nobody has ever wanted to work, though. Like, truly, let's be real about it. And less so than ever, because it's just not made worthwhile. But then, of course, there's the aspect of we are demanding more than we ever have before for less pay than we ever have before. Absolutely no benefits, weird hours, and the expectation that you be constantly available while we remain barely staffed. And if anybody calls out, the whole pyramid gets like collapsed to the floor. And yeah, of course, nobody wants that. No, nobody wants that anymore. And we are very, very tired of it. And it was just a matter of time before everybody began to look up and realize, oh, we don't actually have to keep doing this. And so there's a pretty fun Reddit subthread, or not subthread. What do you call that? Subchannel? Is that a channel? But anyway, subreddit, I guess that's what they're called anti-work. And people will either share things that have happened to them, or they will share things that they have found in the wild, so to speak. And there are a lot of images on there of like small businesses, especially food establishments, that are shuttered for the day with some kind of snarky note taped to the door about how nobody wanted to show up for their shift. And that kind of thing. And it's just always presented as if like, oh, these kids nowadays. And yet everybody agreed to not come in. So that really doesn't feel like it's about them. It really feels like it's about you. And you're just really mad that they decided to call your bluff on treating them like garbage. So, you know, you're going to get what you're going to get. And I really, Martin says that sub is a mixed bag. There's literally no sub that is not, though. Let's be real. So many of them, it's just full of like fake stuff. And Martin says part of it, I think, is increasing levels of automation. Workers of the world unite. Workers of the world definitely unite. And the automation thing, I think, is like not as big an issue as it is presented to be. Like, I think it is to a point, but that is a part of a bigger problem, which is an expectation that CEOs make like 600 times what workers make, which was not the way it has always been. And it's a weird sort of like shift in balance that has happened over the last, I would say the last like 30 years, 20 mostly, the last 20 especially. But yeah, the whole like dynamic of what is expected from an employee versus what they are expected to put up with from an employer, and the complete lack of benefits anymore. You guys, when I was 20, I was 20 years old, I worked as the hostess at a resort restaurant, and I was making $9 an hour as a hostess. This was in 2004 or 2005, and I had full-time hours, I had health insurance, and I had a 401k. As the hostess at a restaurant for $9 an hour, I would bet you absolutely any amount of money that not only are they still only paying $9 an hour 20 years later, but they sure as fuck are not giving their hostess health insurance and a 401k anymore. That's, there is no doubt in my mind that is no longer happening. And that's the shit that people are just like, well, that's not even like a real job. You can't expect to work as a hostess and think you're going to get. Why not though? Like, everybody has to maintain a place to live and their own health. And we act as if it's like unreasonable to expect that no matter what we do for work, we at minimum can keep a roof over our heads and go see a doctor when we're sick. And people are just like, ugh, the entitlement. And it's wild. Like, when did this happen? It's gross. So anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get into this whole seize the means of production, but I stand by it. So this situation is cut off here. Nadja storms off. We see Laszlo, and he is reading some history to Colin Robinson, who is not into it at all. He wants to hear from one of his books, and Laszlo is trying to get him into, culture and whatnot. I like the story about the elves and the shoemaker. All right, I'll tell you the real story. Some third-rate cobbler ripped to the tits on formaldehyde fumes used in his leather tanning process imagines he's seeing little elves do all his work, loses his business, kills himself, the end. Honestly, I feel like that's true in this universe. I mean, like, I feel like a lot of stuff Laszlo's making up on the fly, that feels like, no, that's what happened. That's, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's fucking the Mad Hatter thing, apparently, is because hatters used crazy, like, I think they use like some kind of mercury in the treatment of hats, and they would go nuts. And that's where the Mad Hatter concept comes from, which is just so upsetting, you guys. Do you ever stop and think about all of these, like, extremely toxic substances that used to just be part of everyday life, put in hats, put in wallpaper paint or paste or paint, and so you'd be literally sitting in a room, like, surrounded by a thin layer of asbestos or lead or whatever, and it was just the way you lived. And, like, wonder what is the next substance we're going to find out does this. Like, it's inevitable. We've already started to find out that microplastics that are literally in people's blood, and that it's sort of like unavoidable if you use plastic for anything in your, like, consuming of food, if it's in contact with plastic, you probably have now got plastic on your insides. What else have we got? What else is in our future? It's just very scary sometimes. But this is when Nadja, she's looking through a book and she stops and gets very excited and says, "Everybody, we are taking a trip to the night market." And she describes this as a market that actually exists in every single town, but it's always hidden from the prying, pathetic eyes of humans. And Nandor says it's like the famous Italian street fairs of Little Italy. Very diverse, lots of different cultures represented, sticky shit all over the ground, and a good place to pillage or barter tchotchkes. I want to address once again Nadja's look. Because at the beginning of the episode, we have that very statement eyeglass thing in her hair. In this scene, she has got a permed look to her hair. And she's wearing a red beret with like a leopard pattern on it. And green sparkly eyeshadow. And it's just really like the whole energy of her with these looks is... she is playing up her appearance in a way that she hadn't in other episodes. It's not to say that she never dressed up, but she mostly kind of wore the same outfit a lot. Her hair was the same most of the time. And the amount of different looks that she's going through, it feels like there's a combo of things. One, she's more successful because of this nightclub thing, and because of that, she feels like she has a certain image that she needs to maintain because of that, and she has to, like, be a bit more fashion forward. But also, the whole, like, what I keep thinking is at the forefront of this, and I may be wrong, but when you feel better about yourself, you start taking better care of your appearance, which weirdly then makes you feel better about yourself, and it's like a cycle. And I like to think that she's finally finding success with something that she has tried, and it's something that's been a desire to try for a long time. She's wanted to do one of these nightclubs and kept getting slapped down, and she finally has gotten the chance, and it's working out. So she's kind of like feeling a little bit high on herself and is showing off a little bit more because she's feeling more confident. And I am into it. I really love seeing all of these different looks. Like, it's really, really fun. I'm sure that it's mostly wigs and stuff. I don't care. It just looks really great. So we have a scene with Nandor talking to his wife. And apparently he, like, doesn't want her to come. And it's like, she's still a human. So it was mentioned, and I think it was Martin that was like, maybe he'll turn her into a vampire. And I was like, I can't believe I didn't think of that. That is not on the menu so far. It hasn't even been mentioned. But Nandor tells Guillermo, if anybody stops you and asks why a human is here, I want you to tell them that you're an orc. To which Guillermo's like, but I don't look like an orc. And then he gets this real self-conscious expression and he says, do I? And then later on, he does have to say that, and the person sniffs him. And it says, my mistake, sorry. And apparently it works. I felt so bad for him in this moment. I would say I was a hobbit. I don't know if those are real in this universe, but since there are Babadooks, I'm going to go ahead and say hobbits are real. I'm not quite short enough, but I'm certainly curly-headed and round enough, and I've got fairly big feet. Not as big as one would hope for a hobbit, but what can you do? We're all flawed in our way. So his wife pops out from behind him, Nandor's wife, and says, I'm very excited for this trip as well. Even though we live in the same house, it's so rare that Nandor asks me along when he has an outing with his friends. And as she's saying this, you know what? I changed my mind. I think I'd rather just stay home. And what is Nandor going to do when his wishes run out? How many is this? I wish there was something like kind of keeping track, but I also think we're not meant to know, so that when he runs out, it is a bit of a shock. But yeah, he comes up to her. Oh, what a bummer. I'm so sorry, but okay, fine. I miss you already. And he leaves. And she is left standing there looking a little bit, I won't even say confused, just sort of blank. And I wonder if there's any part of her that is thinking, like, starting to catch on to the fact that she is being manipulated in some way. I don't know how much she is aware of magic at all. And I also, you know, I had said something when they first appeared, all of his, like, wives that he had, about them walking out into the regular world and getting a bit of a shock, but at seeing how far ahead in time they have traveled. I don't think that has happened with her at all. And I'm wondering if we're ever going to see her leave the house and start to, like, put two and two together that something really major happened, you know? But yeah, Nandor is just like, I just wanted to hang out with the boys. That's all I wanted. So we see them all getting onto a subway car. And, Guillermo is sort of confused, like, this is a regular subway full of normal people. To which Nadja says, how dare you question me? And it turns out that she has every right to be irritated with him questioning her, but it certainly seems odd to begin with. So this dude steps forward and he says, ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to raise money for my Uncle Jeffrey. He needs a new heart. Anything that you can give, all helps. And he starts playing this music out of this speaker. And you think that he's going to sing along. And instead he starts farting in rhythm. And I love that the subtitles have brackets and it just says farting rhythmically. This is such a stupid, bad joke, but it really did make me laugh because it was so unexpected. And a bunch of people start to, like, react to the smell, apparently, and they get up and leave. This is a tip for those of you who have not had to travel on subways ever. You're going to get buskers like this all the time. People who either come around and offer to perform in exchange for money, or they're, like, selling some little bullshit for money, DVDs, you know, fabric flowers, whatever. You're also going to occasionally stumble on a subway car that it's super packed today. Everybody is in, like, up to the gills in every other car. And then for some weird reason, this one subway car has almost nobody in it. Perfect. Why don't we all pile into that subway car? And then you're going to get in there and you're going to realize your mistake. It's going to be either somebody took a giant shit on one of the seats and the whole place smells so fucking horrid that nobody can stomach it. Somebody threw up and the force of the train moving made the puke stream from the one end of the train car all the way to the other, and there's nowhere to stand that doesn't have puke on it. Somebody in general just reeks, and this can happen to anybody, but I had this happen in particular. It was somebody who was unhoused, and it was awful. It was clear, like, they were probably just going to the bathroom in their clothing and wearing their clothing around. Like, they smelled like a full-on toilet. And you couldn't be within, like, 10 feet of this person and breathe. It was horrifying. Anytime that you see in a very crowded place a mysteriously, like, open, free area, that shit is going to be open and free because it's too horrible for anybody to handle. You didn't stumble on a treasure. You fell for the thing that everybody knew to avoid. So just that's my tip for the day. So everybody leaves, and then this guy stops the music and says, all right, if you're still here, you know why you're here. Next stop, night market. And when he says that, his eyes light up in that gray sort of way that reminds me a little bit of Colin Robinson. And I don't know if he was like feeding off of the awkwardness of the people around him or what was going on. But yeah, it was a pretty fun introduction. One dude takes his beanie off and he's got like horns on the front of his head. So the train pulls up, doors open. We see quite a crowd out there with tons of like candles and torches. It looks so cool, you guys, honestly. And this put me in mind of a book that I covered with Miles, actually. That was, it's called Nevermore, I think was what it was called, by Neil Gaiman. And the market in that is called the Floating Market, I think. And it is a market that is in London Below, which is like an alternate London that you can only get to if you have the right doorway in. And it's peopled with like all kinds of supernatural creatures. There are human beings with powers, but there's mostly like monsters and beings of different races. And it's a really fun book. I am not, don't kill me, a huge fan of Neil Gaiman, because a lot of the time I find what he's writing to be basically fan fiction, and I don't know why so many people suck his dick over it, but folks love it, which that's fine. I just don't really get it. This was a book that was like truly completely original in a way that a lot of the other work that I have read by him was not. And I thought it was a really fun universe. And apparently he's writing a sequel to it called The Seven Sisters. But, you know, he was like talking about having written the first few chapters a little bit after his Norse mythology book came out. But yeah, I have no idea if there's any prospective date for that to come out. But if you guys want to listen to me and Miles talk about it, the Unspoiled Book Club feed has that conversation, and I really, really enjoyed that book. Ooh, Martin says, I love that book. Oh, cool. I'm glad somebody else knows what I'm talking about. Asher says, I have tried to read Nevermore so many times and I can't get through it. That's fair. Not everything is for everyone. I just went into it kind of afraid that I was going to feel that way because, like I said, Neil Gaiman is extremely hit or miss, and I just find him to be kind of overrated. And there was another book I covered, I believe it was American Gods, actually, and I covered it with Bitches. And I felt kind of bad because Bitches was so psyched about it, but there were a lot of things that I saw coming. And if you have any real knowledge of mythology and stuff, you probably will. And it, once again, just felt like fanfic, which there's nothing inherently wrong with fanfic, but I feel like if a woman were writing this, they wouldn't get the same reception. I'm just saying, there's just a certain kind of leeway given to dudes that I don't think would be extended to a woman. So they're looking around. There's all kinds of things going on, not just talking about maybe getting Laszlo a new coffin. There's a bunch of witches that want to put kids in cages. They are really cool looking witches, honestly. I was kind of curious. I wanted to see more of this. We have gotten some witches in the show, but these witches, they felt more like a hobbity type witch. They weren't elegant. It's a safe space for all of demon kind. We have, let's see, I'm trying to find the spot where Nandor describes oh my God, the cages that they're pointing at. You don't need any more cages. I forgot that is what Guillermo says to Nandor because he's thinking about buying one. A safe space for all of demon kind. Sadly, we have no one form of currency between us all, so we have to rely on the old ways, the bartering system, which is exactly in the floating market in that book. It's exclusively barter. Nobody deals in money. It's just like, what can you give? And the things that you can barter can get really like esoteric, which is really fun. So this is when Nadja chimes in. Lots of people usually end up dead. Luckily, I come from a long line of highly skilled hagglers. My Giagia, she once traded just a little bit of her thigh meat for a whole bag of onions, so I think I know what I'm doing. You guys, I don't even know what to say to that. We're just going to move right along. Something about saying thigh meat. Oh, Christ. So the first place we go are a pair of Valkyries. And I want, if anybody is able to, I really want to emphasize the difference between these two women and the way they're handling this expression thing they're doing, and why one of them is super good at it and why one of them is not. And this is a thing that I know I am not the only one who can see it, but it bothers me that directors don't seem to be either, they don't know how to direct an actor to not do it, or they don't choose the right cut for the final product to like, that doesn't have this happening. But it's something I will run into in a lot of television, especially, but some movies as well. The woman on the left has the wide-eyed staring thing with an almost entirely expressionless face, perfectly down. And there is something about her that looks straight up non-human due to that. The woman on the right just looks like she's trying really hard not to laugh. She doesn't get across the creepy factor of the woman on the left, who seems fully committed and is like not thinking in the way a human thinks. You just look at her face and you're like, oh yeah, that's not right. Something's wrong there. The woman on the right was cracking up a second ago and barely got it under control before the camera started rolling again. And she may not make it to the end of this scene before she cracks and starts laughing again. That's the thing. And you guys, this will absolutely make or break something for me, whether or not you can tell a person's got a bit of a smile going on underneath. And I'm trying to think of what I watched recently, but there was another thing, and I don't know if I was covering it or if it was just for fun that I was watching it, but it was a really similar thing where the person was supposed to be like dead serious and have no expression, but there was a bit of a grin right under the surface. You could see it. You could see it so clearly, and it just completely watered down the whole performance and made it like, and look, I get that it's a comedy, but the part that's supposed to be funny is how creepy they are. And if one of them just feels like they're on an SNL skit and trying not to break, that totally undermines what's supposed to make it funny. So I just really enjoy seeing these like two women side by side, because it's something that I've tried to describe before, and I'm always like, how do I get across what it would look like if they weren't doing this? And it's just such a perfect spot, a perfect example, getting these two faces right next to each other, and one is on point exactly and the other isn't. And the two of them, I will say that I like the way it's done, where they move and look at the camera and then move back and look at Nadja exactly at the same time as one another. I thought that was a really fun touch. And she puts this vase on the table, and they are like kind of walking around as if they're attached at the shoulder and looking at it and talking about the glaze and like how much it's worth. And apparently this was just something that Nadja grabbed off of like Nandor's mantelpiece on the way out of the house. So this worked out for her, but it was no effort and not something that she even necessarily knew was valuable at the time. It makes me wonder if they decided to sell more of their possessions, how much they could get for some of that stuff randomly that's like actual antiques because they just have had it since they were turned kind of thing, you know? So Laszlo at this point, he's walking around with Colin, and Colin's talking about fairies, and Laszlo opens a dumpster, and these two fairies that basically look like giant cockroaches essentially float up and talk to him, and he has to be like, yeah, that's what real fairies look like. And honestly, you guys, if fairies were real, that is probably more like what they would look like, because everything's ugly. Oh God. So this is when we get to the real meat of the episode, which is the familiar fights. And it turns out that there's a whole thing here where vampires bring their familiars to, if not fight to the death, they fight until one of them is injured, and then a vampire will come and end the life of the one that lost. And it's essentially going to go until one of them they're going to keep going until there is one familiar left standing. And usually it seems like that familiar is allowed to just go on with his life. But because Guillermo winds up sort of throwing a wrench in things by not being fun to watch, they don't want to let him just walk away. So he winds up in a much, much worse position. And he's over here horrified, of course, at finding out that familiars are basically treated like dogs in a dogfighting ring. And Nandor is like, I know that you could take every single one of these guys. Y'all, I want you to stop for a moment and pity me, because your girl completely forgot Guillermo is a fucking vampire hunter. And I couldn't understand why Nandor was so confident. Genuinely had a moment of like, you think he can take all of these guys? Why do you think that? And it wasn't until it's explicitly like mentioned that I go, oh, right. Oh my God. Because we just haven't seen any of that out of Guillermo in a minute. So I low-key just like completely dropped that from his personality in my like mental checklist. Sorry about that, Guillermo, but also, you know, it's been a minute since we've seen anything. So I'm not going to blame myself for that totally. And Nandor tries to do the like, oh, my familiar won't be fighting tonight. And everybody starts booing him, and it turns into this whole thing. And they do the whole, what is he scared? And he takes that as a personal insult and is like, fine. And so he puts Guillermo into the ring, so to speak. I want to mention the guy who's like hosting this, who's the one who's out here speaking on the mic. He has this top hat, and I don't know who this actor is. He felt vaguely familiar, but he's fine. And I think it's just because he's like such a mischievous energy, and I always tend to go for that kind of like trickster vibe. But there's something about him that I was just like, hey, what are you doing later, dude? What's going on? And the fight begins. Guillermo keeps getting the better of everybody, but not in ways that are necessarily exciting and fun. At one point, there's a woman that he beats because he just takes her glasses. And she's just sitting there and it's just like, would you just give me my glasses back? And everybody is booing. Oh my God, you guys, I forgot about the fact that the Valkyries are selling furniture and meatballs like IKEA. Oh my God. I'm not going to criticize the ways of other cultures. That's a good little joke, actually. So she keeps trading things up is what's going on with Nadja. I'm just going to jump over to her really quick and finish what's going on before I finish the familiar fights. So yeah, she trades the meatballs to some imps who give her a t-shirt that says, if you can read this, the bitch fell off, and it's meant to be worn by somebody on a motorcycle. And she goes to this other shady dude and is like, how about this t-shirt? Because he's like, she basically is like, don't you have anything for sale that might come from more under the counter? To which he's like, what if you're a narc? And she pulls this t-shirt out and is like, would a narc have this shirt with a very misogynistic joke that laughs at very real road safety regulations or something? It's a very, very good joke because there's this long pause and the dude is looking at her and he starts laughing. And at first I thought he was laughing at her, but then he's like, the bitch fell off. That's really good. And I was like, oh my God, she got it. Because when she said thigh meat for onions, I was fully expecting that we were going to see Nadja just like hitting roadblocks. And instead that shit is working. It's working. She's managing to constantly trade upward. So she gets from him these vials of some sort of like weird milky looking substance. And we do not find out what those are. And we find out later that this is some sort of like lily of the valley essence. And it apparently lessens the pain of being a wraith, which I don't think I realized that wraiths were in constant pain, but that really blows. And she offers it to the union leader in exchange for him accepting that she is going to change absolutely nothing. And he is about to accept it, but his people are right there and hear what he's doing. And they jump on his ass and pop him like a blood-filled water balloon. There is nothing left but a smear of blood on the ground. And then one of them steps forward and is like, I'm the one that's in charge now. And here's what we're going to get. And she offers them 1 day a week off. And she's going to build 4 new storage closets for them to sleep in. Which is truly, like, that's the deal they strike. And it's, you know, an extra day a week off. Like, that's good. But, oh my God. It's just so, it's so weak sauce. And I do enjoy how Nadja really thinks she has solved this problem. But once they jump on him, she immediately starts chanting shit, shit, shit to herself. After all the trouble that she went through to get that stuff, it seems as if the vials are either confiscated or just broken. I would not be surprised if they break them. And I was really glad. I was really relieved they at least come to some sort of arrangement, because I was thinking that this was going to be the running joke, was that the wraiths are treated just as badly as Guillermo's treated, basically, you know? And like I said, I'm sure there's going to be more butting heads, but for now, I felt like we got sort of a happy ending here. Martin says it's called Water Lily of the Nile. That is such a weird name. Thank you. I forgot that's what a weird name. Okay. But it is good to know that that is, you know, it's sort of like a morphine is the connection that I'm making mentally. So that's the deal with Nadja. We're going to wrap things up with Laszlo and Colin. He's talking to Colin about how gnomes are, or the gnome statues there are real. And as he's saying, like, grown-ups sometimes lie because the truth is so boring, I'm thinking, oh, okay, he's lying about those gnomes. But then the gnomes animate and just jump down and run away. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's, maybe they're not scared, but they're definitely actually real. He mentions the emperor's new clothes, and behind him is a witch. They're very real, and one day they'll fight to get hold of your semen, but not in a fun way. Oh, what's semen? Oh my God. So eventually Colin is sort of won over by Laszlo and asks for Laszlo to read to him from one of his own books. And Laszlo starts reading with, this sentence that I'm like, this is ringing a bell. That sentence is really famous. Area of Kansas known as out there or over there or something. And I was like, what is that? And I looked it up, and it's in cold blood. So that's going to be, when he says to Colin, this gets pretty intense pretty quickly. I was like, yeah, wow, all right. I mean, if you're going to be reading to him like things that actually happened, historical things, you could do worse. It is, embellished, certainly, as he has been accused of doing, Capote. But it's going to get a kid's interest, and considering how incredibly bloody fairy tales are, I guess it's kind of on par. So sure, why not? And now I'm going to wrap up the familiar fights. The whole thing with, there's like a hot one that comes out, and he's wearing what I think are like brown corduroys, and he's smoking while he starts to like get in Guillermo's face and really showing off, a lot of leaping through the air, a lot of like really dramatic, and eventually he collapses and starts having like an asthma attack. But this ends again with Guillermo just sort of like bumming the audience out, and nobody knows what to do with him. And eventually Nandor is like, all right, fine. Go, like, we're going to, they have this big badass vampire that's going to come in and just straight up kill Guillermo. And that's the way they're going to wrap the show. And Nandor starts to be like, just kill him. And Guillermo says, okay, look, I can, but like, what is everybody going to do if I just manage to kill him? I'm in a crowd of vampires and I just kill a vampire. How do you think that's going to go? And Nandor's like, oh, shit. Okay, that's fair. So Nandor then says, I'll fight him and I'll kill him. And what occurs is the two of them start this off like it's just going to be a little bit of a, show between them. But they begin talking about how Guillermo actually beat Nandor in their last fight. And Nandor starts to get pretty salty about the fact that he won and tries to say he let Guillermo win, which of course results in both of their pride being pricked and the fight starting to get pretty genuine. And there are some hilarious moments, you guys. They're one of my favorites. So the guy who's doing the commentating is very good. And I know that this is like all scripted, but it's still written well. So he says something about how when Guillermo gets up after everybody is certain that he has died, he's got a shovel and he comes out with it and he breaks it in half and starts like whirling it around. And the commentator says that he's going Phantom Menace with it, which I thought was hysterical. You guys, you should have heard me cackling. That got me so bad. Perfect way to say that. So Guillermo is in the position where he can kill Nandor. He has got stake essentially at his heart. And Nandor is like, go ahead and kill me. I can't believe that I lost. And like, what kind of fucking vampire am I if I can't even beat my own familiar? And Guillermo's like, no, that is not what we're doing. We have to fake this so that we can get the fuck out of here. Pretend to kill me. So that is what they do. It's a pretty, like convincing little scene where Nandor flies into the air behind him and pretends to like snap his neck. And then he lifts Guillermo's body over his head and like just eggs the crowd on who are cheering him. And I kind of wondered if this was going to bring out a bit of actual bloodlust in Nandor, where he was going to be like, you know, I haven't fought to the death in the midst of a crowd in some time, and I kind of miss it, because it seems like it was his total jam when he was a human, you know? But yeah, that is the end of that story between the two of them. And I was sort of into it, you guys. I really am a fan of any time that Nandor and Guillermo throw down in any real way, whether it's physical or verbal. I just like them having confrontations. So getting to do this and really Nandor seeing that Guillermo got the best of him, it's satisfying. I really, really enjoyed it. So, all right, I'm out of time. I'm over time a little bit. So I'm going to have to wrap up. But thank you guys so much for hanging out. I hope you're all enjoying the coverage. Thank you to Max for commissioning this. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.